All right, I'm pleased to welcome everybody. What an amazing turnout. Just been looking at the participant list for a Tuesday night evening lecture. I'm going to turn it immediately over to Debbie Schrag to open and introduce our program for this evening. Debbie, the spotlight is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you to Rabbi Morgenstern. Thank you to Rabbi Klinger. And thank you all for joining in our memorial shiur in memory of our dear friend and community member, Robin Goldman, Rija Bat Zvi Yaakov, Zichronam Livracha. Tonight is the 7th of Shvat. It's Robin's yahrzeit. It's hard to believe that the tremendous void that exists for Robin's family, friends, and community has been for 5 years. Robin was someone who inspired people. She was a super mom to her children, an incredible savti to her grandchildren. She was a respected pediatrician and mentor to her students for over 35 years. Her acts of quiet chesed, doing for others, knew no boundaries. In these 5 years, her children and family, friends and community have ensured that there has been Torah learning, chesed projects, challah baking, a chesed trip to Israel with over 20 women from our shul, all done in her merit. Also established is an annual memorial lecture at Montefiore Hospital, Robin's hospital, in her name, and the Robin Goldman Medical Fund at Emuna's Beit El Ezrachi in Israel. In addition, our shul sanctuary is adorned with the beautiful tapestry in Robin's memory. 5 years has also seen an expansion of Robin's wonderful family, her legacy. Her son Adam and Ariana have had a 5th child, Ezra. Her daughter Alyssa and her husband Joey have had 2 children, Nathaniel and Liana. And Jenna has brought a terrific guy into the Goldman family with her marriage to Josh. May our learning in Robin's zechut tonight be an aliyah for her neshama. Rabbi.
Hi, Chevra. Thank you, Debbie. I just want to describe the tapestry. I know it was on our the email that we sent out. I'm going to do a very quick screen share, and we're on. Okay, so just want to show you this as we, this is one of the ways, a really significant way that we've memorialized Robin in our community. She was such a fixture, and this tapestry sits around where she used to sit in shul every Shabbos, piously davening, and it's also the space where many of her friends and neighbors, the ladies, you guys would get together and learn throughout the entire year following her passing. And just to explicate it a little bit, the top layer is Barcheinu Avinu Kulani Ke'achad Ba'or Panecha. It's a prayer for peace, right? Bless us with the light of your face. Ki Ba'or Panecha Natata Lanu Hashem Elokeinu To'ad Chaim V'Ahavat Chesed U'Tzedakah U'Vracha V'Rachamim V'Chaim V'Shalom. For in the light of your face, your countenance, you've given us all of these things of a love, a Torah of life, a love of kindness, righteousness, blessing, etc., and peace. And underneath that, in the other wave, Vizakeni, it's the prayer, the tefillah that women forever have been saying at Hadlakas Nerus. Vizakeni legadel banim uvnei banim u'avei Hashem yirei Elokim. May I merit to raise righteous children and grandchildren, those who love God. Yirei Elokim, those who fear God. Zera Kodesh, holy descendants, a holy legacy of children, grandchildren. U'meirim et ha'olam, that light up the world with Torah and Maasim Tovim, with Torah and good deeds. V'ha'er neirenu shelo yichve le'olam va'ed, and may their light, and really for us, may her light forever illuminate, and may it never be extinguished. forever and ever. Goosebumps just when I say it out. And if you'll notice the gold letters, those who might have forgotten that are there, those gold letters spell out her name, Rija, Reish Yud Zayin Aleph. And they serve as this really living legacy to who she is and who she was and all that she represents. We have purple children dancing in the middle of these waves of peace and light, because that was her life, right? That was her life in being a pediatrician and helping countless people and being memorialized that way, but really living her life that way. Not just the purple. I know in the hospital that was like a ubiquitous color for her and the way that they remembered her, but children. It was always when a child was in need, when we needed help in the shul. We always, whether it was in the shul or in the community, everyone went to Robin. And it also speaks to, again, what she felt so deeply about her children and about what she wanted her children to be and how she wanted them to grow up and what she wanted them ultimately to become, to teach from generation to generation to generation. That's the memorial tapestry that we have. And being home, I just want to show you something else. I keep this really sitting by right here by my desk where I spend a lot of time these days. This is a whittled out piece of wood that was taken by Robin from a cemetery in Poland. And I believe Adam, if you're on the call, right, you could say Adam whittled a mezuzah out of this charred wood literally from the Warsaw Cemetery. It says inside Adam Reich, Poland, 713 on our amazing trip. And I know that the family's looking for a way to memorialize Robin in that way as well. That was such an important part of her life. That trip really changed so much for her and really fueled her for the next few years. But again, it speaks to her legacy. It's taking something charred and broken and old and fraying and turning it into something magnificent and meaningful and enduring, a mezuzah. May her life and her legacy and her light, first and foremost, protect and watch over her children and her grandchildren. May it be a mezuzah for all time, and may we feel it, and may it watch over us, her friends, neighbors, our community, la'olmei olamim, forever and forever. Tihi zichra baruch, may her memory forever endure as a blessing. Going to pass it over to Debbie to introduce our guest scholar, Adina Fredman, who we're so blessed to have in our community and to be presenting this evening. Debbie.
Thank you, Rabbi. As you said, we're honored to have Adina with us tonight, our community member, our friend, a friend of Robin's, and the mother of Sarah and Robert, who moved back to the community, and the grandchildren. So just to let you know a little more about Adina, she learns at Yeshivat Maharat in Riverdale. She's a member of their executive kollel, and she also teaches Tanakh in the Maharat's Beit Medrash program. Adina, we thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm so honored to be here. Thank you for thinking of including me. I just am honored to be part of this event that brings us all together to mark this very important date. I also want to thank you, Debbie, and I don't know who else is in the group, but friends of Robin who sent me a beautiful gift. The card didn't say your name, so I'm just thanking all of you. It was really unnecessary and very sweet. And the third thank you that I want to say is to Rabbi Klinger, who among his many other roles in our community is also the Zoom master and will function as my screen sharer for tonight. I really appreciate that. I don't think I can talk and screen share at the same time. Also, if I'm hoping to have some some give and take, some conversation, some sharing later toward the end. But if you want to put anything in the chat during the talk, you're free to do it. I'm going to ask Rabbi Klinger just to keep an eye on it, because I don't think that I'll be able to. Good. Thank you. So the title that I chose for this shiur, Ater Zkenim Bnei Banim, grandchildren are the crown of the elders, preserving our legacy, comes from the pasuk in Mishlei in Proverbs. And I've been thinking about this topic a lot, about what it means to be a grandparent. What does it mean to shape identity? What does it mean to be a transmitter of tradition, of values? And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And of course, when Debbie asked me to give the shiur in honor of Robin, it immediately came to mind about what an amazing mother and grandmother and safti that she was to her family. So it seemed like a very appropriate subject for us to talk about tonight. So before we start, I want to just make 3 points, general points about what I'm going to talk about. So number one, even though I call this lecture about grandchildren and focusing on grandparents, this is not meant only for grandparents. Obviously, if you are not a grandparent, everything I say will still be relevant. Whether you are a grandparent or a grandchild, or you're that in-between generation between your parents and your children, I think this is relevant to all of us, to any of us who see ourselves as transmitters of Jewish values, Jewish learning. And the second point I want to make is that the sources that I'm going to use are very gendered. I'm using traditional sources, and in traditional sources, men have certain roles, grandfathers have certain roles, women have certain roles. And I don't read them that way. I don't think it's necessary to read them that way. I hope that when we look at the sources, you will see them as applying to men and women. Again, as your family functions, whatever the roles people play in your own family, obviously different from how it was in our parents' homes and our children's homes. I just have like a quick little story to tell you how I know things have changed so much. This is a story that I actually heard from the grandmother, who told the story about her then, I think, 2-year-old granddaughter, who had climbed up on the dining room chair to the dining room table in their home. And there was a Gemara on the table, and she opened the Gemara. And someone asked her, what are you doing? And she said, I'm playing mommy. So I think our gender roles have evolved in many ways. Just keep that in mind. And the third point that I want to make is when we're talking about families and relationships and communication, it's going to be hard to ignore COVID. I mean, it's lurking, right? It's here. But I would like to, for the purposes of studying the sources, I want to ignore it. And when we get to some time to discuss and to share stories, of course, everyone is welcome to bring in those issues as well. They're really unavoidable. But for right now, I just want to leave that out of the discussion, if that's okay. Okay, so let's get started. So Rabbi Klinger put up on the screen a graph taken from a study done by an organization called the Jewish Grandparent Network. I've recently discovered them. This is an organization started by a woman named Lee Handler. And in 2018, she decided to do a survey of what are Jewish grandparents like. She notes that over the years, the concept of Jewish family has changed across America. And so she decided to do a survey. I think she had about 8,000 participants. And she came up with all kinds of information about what Jewish grandparents and grandparenting is like. And I just wanted to share this particular graph. There's a lot more information if you want to check on the Jewish Grandparents Network. It's a very, very interesting site. I just wanted to share this particular graph with you. In this graph, she came up with 5 different categories of Jewish grandparents. And just to share this, so I actually found this graph in an article about this survey called "Who's Your Bubby Now?" So if we look at this graph, I want to start with I think it's on my right, the joyful transmitter. So she came up with these 5 categories. So the first category, which is about 20% of grandparents that she interviewed, are joyful transmitters. These are grandparents who love being grandparents. It's very important for them to transmit Jewish values and beliefs. and they model these values and beliefs for their grandchildren. And the second category, which was 16% of her survey, are called faithful transmitters. And these are the people who want their children to have a strong connection to Judaism, and they intentionally model Jewish behavior. And the third category are what she called engaged secular grandparents, like 23%, that they're very engaged with their grandchildren, but they don't model Jewish faith or practice, and they're not really involved in that sense. The fourth category, which is like the really sad one, are what are called wistful outsiders, right? People who are removed either geographically or emotionally or in some way from their grandchildren, have very little involvement. And the last category she called non-transmitters or detached grandparents, who they have some involvement, but they are not involved or engaged at all in anything Jewish when it comes to their grandchildren. And I thought it was important to note these things because about a third of the respondents, right, 36%, are actively engaged in transmitting Judaism in some form or other to their grandchildren. And remember, this group of participants is not particularly observant, and it's not even clear that the grandchildren we're talking about are halakhically Jewish grandchildren. But about a third of the respondents are involved with transmitting in some way or other, or in many ways, Jewish traditions to their grandchildren. And that's the group that I really want to be addressing, knowing full well that there are among us, multiple experiences of how we grandparent, or how we want to grandparent, or how our parents grandparent. So whenever we ask a Jewish question, we need to go to our Jewish sources to get an answer. So I'd like to start with the question: what do our sources say about being a grandparent? What do we need to know from our sources? So the first source that Rabbi Klinger put up here is from the end of Breshit, from the parsha I think we read not so long ago, right? Like 3 weeks ago. And this is the story at the end of Vayechi, when Yosef hears that Yaakov is ill, and he brings his sons Ephraim and Menashe to Yaakov to have Yaakov bless them. And when they come and Yaakov asks, who are these? Yosef says, these are my sons. So I'm looking at the first pasuk, pasuk Hey, and Yaakov says, "Vata shnei banecha hanoladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim ad boi elecha Mitzrayima." These two sons that were born to you here in Egypt before I, Yaakov, came down to Egypt, lihem Ephraim u'Menashe ki Reuven v'Shimon yiyuli. These two young men, Ephraim and Menashe, are to me like Reuven and Shimon. In other words, exactly like my sons. They're not my grandsons. They are my sons. I will treat them like my sons. And then a few verses later, we actually have the actual blessing, of course, all familiar with. Hamalach hagoel oti mikora, right? Our children know this, right? Yivarech et hanarim v'yikareh behem shmi, right? The angel who has protected me from all evil, from all harm. The angel should bless these young men and call them by my name, and also the name Shem Avotai Abraham Yitzchak, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Yitzchak, V'yidgula rov b'kerev haaretz, and may they multiply, be fruitful and multiply. And what I wanted to note about these two psukim, Rabbi Klin, can you just bring it down a little bit? Is the personal first, the other way, the personal first person language here, right? In the first pasuk, the same phrase jumps out at us twice, right? Lihe, right? These young men, they are mine. And at the end of the pasuk, you li, right? They are to me. And the same thing in the second pasuk, shmi, right? It's all very first person, very personal. They're mine. And I think this is really notable. I think especially because remember, these are the grandsons that did not grow up in Yaakov's household, right? We know it's very striking because we know that when Yaakov came down to Egypt, the Torah lists all the at least the male members of the family that came down, and there are lots of grandchildren. But these two grandchildren were in Egypt, and it's interesting that these are the two that Yaakov decides he has to hold closest, bring most tightly to him. Maybe because they're the weakest link, maybe because the other children and grandchildren, spent many years in Yaakov's home in Canaan. Even Yosef, right, who's been gone for many years, spent his formative years until the age of 17 in Yaakov's house. But it's these two, Ephraim and Menashe, who missed that, who missed growing up in Yaakov's house. And maybe for that reason, Yaakov feels that he needs to bring them, to pull them closest, to be the closest to him. And it's not just, we can easily see the emotional piece of it, but it's not just an emotional piece, because it really has legal ramifications. Because when Yaakov says that Ephraim and Menashe are like Reuven and Shimon, what he's really saying is that they are the tribes of Israel. They have now replaced the single tribe of Yosef with the two tribes of Ephraim and Menashe. And from then on, we speak of the tribes, starting from Sefer Shemot, we speak about the tribes of Ephraim and Menashe. So it was not just Yaakov's emotional connection to these grandchildren, very personal emotional connection, but also where he's placing them within the family structure. So Chazal tell us that, not in the Psukim, but Chazal tell us that Yaakov was able to teach Ephraim and Menashe Torah. That when he came down to Egypt, they started to go learn with the Zaydi. And so the question that I wanted to ask then is, well, do we have an obligation to teach? Or what is that obligation of a grandparent to teach a grandchild? So Chazal have something to say about that, and that's in our next source. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Kol hamlamed et ben beno Torah me'aleh alav hakatuv ki'ilu kibla mehar Sinai. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi teaches that anyone who teaches his grandchild, again, I'm using gendered language here, his grandchild Torah, it is as if he received the Torah from Har Sinai. Shene'amar, where does Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi learn this from? He sees the pasuk in the beginning of Dvarim, V'hodatem levanecha livnei banecha, like the verse in the beginning of Dvarim that says you should make known to your children and your children's children. And Samichle, and the next verse is Yom Asher Amata Lifnei Hashem Elokecha B'chorev. So from a Pshat reading, right, we have one pasuk. This is Moshe's speeches before he dies, and he's reminding Bnei Israel they always have to remember their history. And so we have the verse saying, you must make known to your children, let's teach your children. And immediately next to what should you teach your children? You should teach them about Har Sinai, the experience at Sinai. And so Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi takes those two verses and kind of weaves them together. He juxtaposes those two verses. And he says, what it means when you teach a child or a grandchild, it is as if they stood at Har Sinai. And that's a very powerful statement. Right? That's right, that we are responsible for giving our children and our grandchildren like the equivalent of a Sinai experience. That's kind of scary, right? It's not just enough that I teach the halacha or I explain the parsha, right? The idea is that we have to transmit something of that feeling of what was at Har Sinai. And that's a very big deal, right? Because Chazal tell us that even the lowest maidservant, right, experienced at Har Sinai more than the greatest rabbis ever experienced. This is a very overwhelming, very powerful, tremendous responsibility to make our children part of that Masorah, that link, that chain that started back at Har Sinai, and that we are now required to pass on to our future generations. That's a huge responsibility. And it's not clear exactly what does that mean? What do we have to teach? But certainly the idea that the Torah that was given on Har Sinai is this Torah that I am now passing on to my children and my grandchildren. And I just want to tell a quick little story because this is like the most literal meaning of what it means to teach your child that this is their Torah. It's a true story. So many of you know that when we used to go to shul, that Steve and I used to daven at the early minyan, and then my son-in-law Robert would bring my grandchildren to shul for the 9 o'clock minyan, and they would of course come to visit us, well, mostly to get candy from the candy man, but also to come say good Shabbos to Stevie and to I. And they would often show up just around the time that we were taking out the Sefer Torah from the Aron Kodesh. And one time Liana, who was about 4 or 4.5 at the time, was standing next to me, and she sees Torah is coming out of the Aron Kodesh, when it's being carried to the Shulchan. And she looks at me and she says, Savta, how come the Torah only belongs to the men? And I literally burst into tears. Like in the middle of the shul, I burst into tears. And I had to walk outside, and I took her with me. Of course, she thought she did something wrong because I was crying. And I was literally holding her by the shoulders and saying, no, this is your Torah. It doesn't just belong to the men. It belongs to everyone. This is your Torah. So that was my experience of trying to create a yahrzeit experience in the social hall of the Young Israel Scarsdale. And this idea that we are the transmitters, that we have that awesome responsibility of creating Sinai experiences for our children, for making them love Torah, is something that we say every day. We say in in Birkot HaShachar, right, in the Tefillot in Birkot HaShachar, every day, but probably just like say it without even paying so much attention, right? We say, V'harevna Hashem Elokeinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu b'fi amcha Beit Yisrael, right? Hashem, may the words of your Torah be pleasant in our mouths and the mouths of the people of Israel. V'niyeh anachnu v'tzetzaenu v'tzetzei amcha Beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shmecha v'lomdei Toratecha. Right? We hope that we and our descendants and the descendants of all of Am Yisrael all together should know you, should know God, and should be learners of Torah for its own sake. Baruch atah Hashem, hamlamed Torah l'amo Yisrael. Right? We say this every day. Every day we're repeating. We want our descendants to be part of this Nesorah, to be part of this, not just to own Torah, but it should be v'harevna, right? It should be sweet to us. It should be pleasant to us. And interestingly, this exact same paragraph is said when we make a siyum, right? If you finish learning a Seder and Mishnah, or Masachet and Gemara, or any other big learning that we do, and we make a siyum at the end. So the prayer at the end includes this paragraph. And I just find that really, really interesting that we use the exact same words and the exact same wish for our children and our descendants, both in like the most simple every morning prayer that we say every day, without giving it much thought, and the same exact prayer when we finish a major piece of learning, whatever it is, whether it's Torah or Torah Shebichtav, Torah Sheba'al Peh, we have, when we accomplished and we've learned for months or years or really labored over that Torah, we have the same wish, both on both ends of our religious experience. I don't mean to say Torah is I don't mean to say that davening is a low end of our experience, but kind of daily routine kind of experience. We say the same thing as when we reach kind of a pinnacle of dedicated, complex learning, and this idea that we are that we are always thinking about our descendants and what we hope for them and what we hope their learning should be for them. So clearly, from our sources, text learning is very important, and we are commanded to teach our children and grandchildren text. But as everyone knows, text learning is certainly not the only, and it's probably not the most important kind of Torah learning. Certainly experiential Torah is, I would say, equally, if not more important. And it's very important how our grandchildren see us experiencing Torah. How do we celebrate Shabbat? How do we celebrate the holidays? What are interpersonal relationships like? What are our ben adam l'chaviro like? What stakas do we give? What chesed do we participate in? And Debbie mentioned so many of the chesed and staka connections that we have with Robin, and hope that they'll continue. What do we get dressed up to do? What excites us? What's important to us? That we're always modeling that for our grandchildren, and they learn more from that than than anything we put in front of them with a piece of paper. So to explain that connection between text learning and experiential learning, so Rav Soloveitchik said it better than I can ever say it. So this is not up on the screen, but I want to read a passage that's probably familiar to many of you. This was the eulogy that Rav Soloveitchik gave for his Machatena stuff for the Talmud Rebbitzin. And in this section that I'm going to read, he is actually talking about his own mother. I'm sure many of you have heard this before. I just think says it all. Okay, so he says, most of all, I learned that Judaism expressed itself not only in formal compliance with the law, but also in a living experience. She taught me that there is a flavor, a scent, a warmth to mitzvot. I learned from her the most important thing in life, to feel the presence of the Almighty and the gentle pressure of his hand resting upon my frail shoulders. Without her teachings, which quite often were transmitted to me in silence, I would have grown up a soulless being, dry and insensitive. The laws of Shabbat, for instance, were passed on to me by my father. They are part of Musar Avicha. The Shabbat, as a living entity, as a queen, was revealed to me by my mother. It's a part of Torah Imecha. The fathers knew much about the Shabbat. The mothers lived the Shabbat, experienced her presence, perceived her beauty and splendor. The fathers taught generations how to observe the Shabbat. Mothers taught generations how to greet the Shabbat and how to enjoy her 24-hour presence. Clearly, even the Rav Soloveitchik, right, with a huge amount of learning that he did, years and years that he learned with his father, yet what he's remembering many years later is the experiential learning that he had with his mother. So I think we've made the point that when it comes to our grandchildren, when it comes to passing on our teachings, we need both text learning, we need both experiential learning. But I want to add a third point. I want to add that we have an obligation to nurture, and this we learn from the Book of Ruth, from Megillat Ruth. It's not enough to teach. It's not enough to create experiences, to have our grandchildren join us in those experiences. There's actually a need to nurture, and that I find comes out loud and clear in this the last few verses of the Book of Ruth. So just as a reminder, remember, Ruth the Moabite has left her land of her birth and followed her mother-in-law Naomi back to Eretz Yisrael, where they're impoverished. She ends up in the fields of Boaz, who was very kind to her. Naomi creates a situation where Boaz realizes that he's obligated to marry Ruth, and they get married. So that's where we're gonna start reading here. Vayikach Boaz et Ruth vatihilo leisha vayavoy la vayiten Hashem laherayon vatiled ben. So Boaz and Ruth get married, and she becomes pregnant, and she gives birth to a son. Vatomarna hanashim el Naomi. Women say to Naomi, Baruch Hashem asher lo hishpit lach goel hayom v'yikra shmo b'Yisrael. Blessed is the Lord, right? Who gave you a son, basically, who gave you a goel, a redeemer, and he shall have a name in Israel. Striking here, right, that we have this phrase v'yikra shmo b'Yisrael, and that it's Naomi, right? But Tomarna hanashim el Naomi, right? That she is, right? The verse before says that Ruth gave birth, and the next verse says, and the women said to Naomi. Okay, let's just skip down a drop. Okay, Vatikach Naomi et hayeled vatishiteo b'chayka vatihilo leomenet. So Naomi takes the baby, and she literally cradles him, right? Literally holds him, and is his, I guess the English here says foster mother. She raised him, right? She physically holds him, she physically nurtures him, and she also raises him during his lifetime. Vatikrena lo hashchinot shem lemor. And interestingly, who gives this baby the name? It's not the mother or the father or even the grandmother, right? It's the neighbors who give this child his name. Lemor yulad ben leNaomi. A child has been born to Naomi. Vatikrena shmo Oved. They name him Oved. Hu avi Shai, hu avi David. So this is a very strange paragraph, right? It's very strange because even though clearly Ruth and Boaz are the biological parents of this child, right away all the focus is on Naomi. Naomi, who had nothing, right? She lost her husband, she lost her sons. She has no future. She has no descendants. And all of a sudden, by God's will, by miracle, she has now has a descendant and is nurturing and is physically holding and nurturing this child who is her future. And we don't know what happens to Ruth and Boaz. We don't hear about them anymore. The Chazal say that Boaz was very elderly and he died right away. Some of us like to think that it was a Cinderella story and they lived happily ever after. But the focus here is on the grandmother, on Naomi, and how she raises this child. And a lot of commentators on the Book of Ruth have asked the question: what was it about King David's upbringing? What was it that made him David? Why is the Megillah telling us all his yichus all the way back to his great grandmother? Why is that relevant to who the person that became King David? And some have noted that it's the chesed of Ruth to her mother-in-law Naomi. It's the chesed of Boaz to this unknown foreign young woman. He's kind to her from the first minute they meet, eventually marries her. That it's that world of chesed is the world that David comes out of. That's a very beautiful understanding. But again, just juxtaposing these two psukim, just looking at how the Megillah brings them together, and we've been doing that this whole time, right? There is a connection between Vatikach Naomi et hayeled v'tishiteu b'chayka, right? She took the child, she holds him, physically holds him, she raises him, and that concept is connected immediately to the lineage of King David. So I would argue that we have a third obligation when it comes to grandparenting, right? We have, as we said, the obligation to teach text, the obligation to create and be part of all kinds of experiential learning, and number three, to actually nurture physically, whether that means the hugging and the kissing and the being present and those manifestic, sitting on the lap, all those things that we think about, those pictures that we have in our heads when we think about grandparenting. And I know that bringing this up, I'm going to get to the COVID piece now. I know that all three of these have been very difficult for us these last number of months, whether it's our children, our grandchildren, our parents. It's been hard to do all these things. And since I have a minute, I actually want to share this children's book for a minute. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this children's book. It's called Tea with Zadie. It's a PJ Library book. Any of you get PJ Library books for your grandchildren? They distribute books of Jewish content to Jewish children. And this is a book that came out in 2014. And I've read it to my grandchildren a number of times. And this is just really sweet story about, again, called Tea with Zadie. I'm not plugging the book. I just think it's relevant. And in this book, I'll try to just show it to you. I'm not going to read the whole book. This little girl tells us that every day at 3:30, me and Zadie time for tea. And it's a very sweet book about how, she pours the tea and she sings a song and he tells a story and they laugh. And it's very, very sweet. And then at the end, she says, you don't have to read it. You can say, I say goodbye. He says, tomorrow, sweetie pie. Because every day at 3:30, me and Zadie time for tea. And I don't know if you can see in this picture, which we don't find out till the last page, what's actually going on here. Can you see that? Right. So when I used to read this book to my grandchildren, I thought it was just very sweet. It's a really nice story, and how grandparents make different efforts to stay in touch with their children. Obviously, having tea every day is a beautiful idea, but now I find it very bittersweet. I find it very difficult to read this book now because our reality has changed, and in a world where I feel like it's my role, it's our roles to communicate, to teach, to nurture, to demonstrate love. It's become much harder to do that, and whether we're talking about actual text learning, whether we're talking about experiential learning, I think the paradigm of that is the Seder, the Pesach Seder, or all the other ways that we experience our Judaism and our values with our children, and certainly the nurturing piece. But I don't want to end on a sad note. I actually want to end with a blessing. This last source that I have here is a blessing that I want to leave us with. I want to leave the members of Robin's family and her friends with. So this is a story in the Gemara where Rav Nachman and Rav Yitzchak were having a meal together, and they talk Torah together. And when they're getting ready to leave, so Rav Nachman asks his rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak, to give him a blessing. So we're going to start there. Follow along in English. Ki havu miftare mehadade, amar le levrachanmar. When they were leaving each other, Rav Nachman said to Rav Yitzchak, Master, can you give me a blessing? Amar le emshol chamasha. I'll tell you a parable. Lama davar domeh le'adam shaya holech b'midbar v'haya ra'ev v'ayef v'tzameh. So there was a man walking in the desert, and he was hungry and tired and thirsty. Umatza ilan sheperotav mitukin v'tzilo na'eh v'amat hamayim over tachtav. And he came. This man in the desert comes across a tree that has beautiful fruit and beautiful shade, and there is a stream of water passing underneath. So he ate the fruit, and he drank the water, and he sat in the shade. So the man said to the tree, how can I bless you? If I want to bless you that you should have sweet fruit, your fruit are sweet. If I want to bless you that you should have beautiful shade, well, you already have beautiful shade. If I want to bless you that you should have a water source flowing underneath your roots, you already have that. Rather, I'll bless you that it be God's will that any other trees or saplings or any other growth that comes out of you should be just like you. Afata, same with you, Rav Nachman. Right? If I bless you that you should have Torah, you already have Torah. If I bless you with wealth, you already have wealth. If I bless you with sons, you already have sons. Rather, I bless you that it should be God's will that your descendants, again the word tzetzaim, descendants that come from you should be just like you. And this is the blessing that I want to leave us with, that we take our talents and our knowledge and our abilities and our love and our relationships, and we use those all together to pass on to our children, to pass on to our grandchildren, so that when I don't want to say when all is done, when we turn around and look back, we will truly say that our grandchildren are our crowns. So thank you very much. I'm open to anyone would like to share grandparenting stories. I'm totally happy to hear them, or any comments, anything in the chat. Rabbi Klinger, however you want to do it.
Yeah, if anybody wants to, I gave everybody the ability to actually to unmute themselves. They want to share something, or if you want to just share in the chat box. I see people are already typing in there. If you have questions, please feel free to follow up with that. There are reaction buttons down at the bottom if you want to raise your hand, so I can get your attention. You get my attention that way. All is available, but it's really a beautiful shiur, Adina. Thank you so much for sharing this with our community.
So it's interesting. I had thought about perhaps letting people share, during the presentation, and I said, no, I can't do that because everyone will have so many stories to tell. We'll never get to the end of it. So I'll wait till the end. I'm happy to answer questions, or if anyone, I'm sure many of us have had experiences like the ones that I spoke about. Or not.
Has anyone actually heard on the YouTube that song, Ilan Ilan?
Yeah, there are a number of renditions of it. It's beautiful. It's very beautiful. It's very beautiful.
And isn't it a song that has something to do with the holiday coming up, Tu B'Shvat?
Oh, cool. Yeah, I didn't even put two and two together. Absolutely, totally appropriate. That and as we're getting close to Tu B'Shvat, that we think in terms of trees and roots and branches. Beautiful.
Can I say something?
Sure.
To those of us who never had grandparents and grew up without any grandparents, maybe with aunts, uncles, but nothing as a grandparents, to see our children relate to our parents, we being the sandwich generation, it was absolutely amazing. It was amazing to them to call Zaidi, or Bobby, or Grandma, or whatever language we raised them. It was a completely new, beautiful, fantastic experience. So
yeah, I was thinking about that when I was talking about the Yaakov piece of it, because that kind of that like fierce, you're mine. Right, I make you mine. I call you by my name, which I didn't mention at the time, but ties very nicely to what you were saying. That when we named, that's exactly the language that we use when we name children. Right, right, we call them their name, and whether we follow the Ashkenazi tradition of naming our children after relatives who are no longer with us, and in our generation, it was very often relatives that were lost in the Holocaust, or whether we follow the Sephardi tradition. To honor our living relatives, either way, we're saying our children are part of that chain, and our children are part of that Masorah. That maybe parts of it were lost, but we're pulling the ends of that chain back together. I think that's a very important.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments people wanted to share at this time? All right. Well,
so thank you so much for letting me be part of this commemoration, and for letting us be together as a community to remember Robin.
May the learning tonight be an elevation for her neshama on this 5th yahrzeit. And thank you so much, Adina. Thank you all for joining for this special evening. And we wish everybody a good night. Be well, everybody.
Thank you, Adina.
Thank
Thank you, Adina. Yashikov.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.